If you're visiting with us today, we are glad you're here. We are so glad you're here. We want you to know that you are our honored guest, and we mean that. We want to service you any way we can. We want to be here for you. If you have any kind of needs, please know that right after the sermon this morning, there'll be some folks up here in the back room who are willing to listen to you, willing to talk with you, willing to pray with you, and see if there's any way that we can help you. We hope you stick around after service, let us get to know you and give you a chance to get us to know better. But know this, if you stick around to get to know us after service today, you are going to find truth in what Peter said in his prayer. Peter said in his prayer this morning, basically, that most of the people in this room are horribly, horribly imperfect people. And those of us who are not have learned to tolerate these people. That's not true. I'm just kidding around. Everyone here in this room, everyone that goes to this church is horribly, horribly flawed and imperfect. We all make mistakes. We all get on each other's nerves from time to time. We even offend one another once in a while. We all have weaknesses and struggles. We all fall so far short of what God expects from us. We are horribly imperfect, horribly flawed. And the more you get to know us and the more we get to know each other, the more we know that that's true. I hope you didn't come here this morning thinking you were going to find a group of perfect people, because if you did, you're going to be very disappointed. And if you're visiting with us this morning and you're a perfect person, please tolerate us. Please give us a chance. You know, the fact that this group of people meets every Sunday morning here makes a statement about us. It makes a statement. It says that we recognize that we're imperfect people. Perfect people have no need of God. Only imperfect people see their need and know that they need to come back to their Creator. We are imperfect people who operate in an imperfect world. And our world is imperfect because, well, it has 6 billion imperfect people in it. You can't think, one imperfect person can't make anything perfect. 6 billion people all working together in imperfection can't make anything perfect. We live and operate in an imperfect world. The lives that we lead has taught us, has led us to know that the world that we live in is plagued with heartaches and with trials. It's fraught with challenges and tragedies. It's filled with our own mistakes. It's filled with the mistakes of other people. We live in an imperfect world. The existence that we know we don't have perfect lives, right? Have you ever had one of those days? You know what I'm talking about? One of those days? One of those days that by 10 o'clock you're kind of saying to yourself, I should have just stayed in bed today. Some of you are thinking that right now. I just should have stayed in bed today. One of those days when you feel like I am standing on the deck of the Titanic and this day is going down the tubes. And just when you think your day is going to get a little better, just when you think there's a little light at the end of the tunnel, it gets worse. And that light is what? A train coming at you, right? Have you ever had one of those days? Have you ever had one of those days 2 days in a row? Have you ever had a week of one of those days? A month? A year? Yeah, huh? I know that there's some people here this morning that feel like they are perpetually living in one of those days. It goes on and on and on. We look back. Some people in this room right now are struggling with health issues. They've struggled with them for years. Some of you are struggling through troubled relationships, whether it's with a spouse or a child or a parent, a coworker, a boss. It's just been going on and on and on. Some of you are going through financial struggles. Some of you don't have jobs. Some of you don't know how you're going to make the rent next month. Some of you may be fighting with addictions. Or maybe you're fighting with someone who is having struggles with addictions. The list goes on and on and on. In this life, there will never be a shortage of troubles. There will always be concerns. There will always be something that we're faced with that is unpleasant. Because this life is hard. This life has pain. This life has illness and death. This life has taxes. This life has furnaces that break down in the middle of winter. This world has car accidents. This world has to-do lists that never end. This life has unreasonable demands. This sermon is starting to get a little depressing. Is that it then? Is that it? Is that what we can expect from this life? This is all we have to look forward to? I know a lot of Christians go through their life and they're saying, boy, I can't wait to die. Can't wait to go to heaven because then life will be good. They've given up on this life because we are imperfect people operating in an imperfect world. Is life just a long road of misery and discontent and hardships? Is that all we have to look forward to? Or is there some other way? Is there some other way to navigate in this imperfect world with the imperfect people that we deal with each day? You know, there's some good news here. We actually have something in our favor. There is something in each one of us. No matter what you believe or don't believe, there is something in each one of us that is working in our favor. We've got an ace in the hole, as it were. Within each one of us, there is something that will allow us to deal with the imperfect people we come into contact with each day. There is something within each of us that will allow us to deal with this imperfect world and all the troubles that it has. And not only cope with this world, and not only cope with people, but thrive in this world. There's something in each one of us that's in our favor. You know what that is? We are all created in the image and the likeness of God. You are created in the image of God. You are created in the image of God. Hard to believe, but you're created in the image of God. We are all created in the image of God. On the last day of creation, on the sixth day, after God had created everything, God then said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness. God finishes creation with a personal touch. He created all the other animals. He created everything else. And at the end, he said, I'm going to form man out of the dust of the ground. And this is the only part of creation where it says something like this. And how did man get his life? What did God do? He breathed his life into him. And he imprinted upon him his own image. This concept of being created in the image and likeness of God, as you can well imagine, is highly debated among theologians. What it really means to be created in the image of God. You can read some theories out there. They are wacky, some of them, right? Some of them say being created in the image of God means that I look like God. My physical appearance looks like God. I sure hope not. I'm not looking at you, Nick, I just happened to pick you out of the crowd. I sure hope that that's not what it is. You know, there's some theories out there that say that being created in the image of God means that the things that we do really aren't wrong, because God can't do wrong, and if I'm made in his image, I can't do anything wrong. Whoa, that's kind of wacky. But there are some concepts that are almost universally agreed upon when it comes to this idea, this concept of being in the image of God. And in its simplest terms, it is that we were made to resemble our Creator. We were made to resemble God. Think of it this way. Think of it as spiritual DNA. All right? Carol and I have 3 children. Our children are not carbon copies of us. Jake is not mini-me, right? He is not a little version of Jay. Not a little version of Carol either. But within Jake, within Rachel, within Rebecca, there is some of me. There is some of my DNA in them. There is some of Carol's DNA in them. They were made to resemble us in certain ways. They have some of our traits, some of our characteristics. But they are not us to the fullest extent. They are not exactly like us. And being made in the image of God is much the same way. We aren't God, although some of us tend to act that way sometimes. We are not fully God. God is all-knowing. We are not, although we think we are. God is ever-present. We are not. So the image of God means that we have some of His characteristics within us. The Creator placed within us some of His traits, that we could be like Him. We have portions of Him, but we are not fully Him. This image of God, this likeness of God in us manifests itself in many different ways. It manifests itself mentally. You know, we were built with reason. We were built with free choice. We can make decisions. This shows God's greatness. It shows His holiness. It shows that He creates, so we create. When someone invents something, when someone creates, when someone goes someplace that no one's ever gone before, when they've done something no one's ever done before, that is God's image in us. This likeness of God is also shown, believe it or not, in our morality. Man was created in righteousness and in perfect innocence. When God made Adam, when he was in the garden, he was righteous. He was innocent. He was perfect. That's the image of God in Adam. This is a reflection of God's holiness. You know, when God looked at all He had created, after He was done, He said what? It was all what? It wasn't just good. It was very good. He looked, He said, everything is righteous. Everything is right. Our conscience, our moral compass, if you will, is the vestige of that initial state of righteousness. Whenever someone writes a law to protect a child, whenever someone recoils from evil, whenever someone is praised for good behavior, when we feel guilt or shame about the wrong things we do, we are making a statement that God's image is in us. Because that is the way God looks at things. That is the way God feels. The image of God being in us is also reflected in the fact that we are social beings. Man is created to be in fellowship with other people. That's why God created in the first place. God wanted to have a relationship. And because He wanted to have a relationship, He made us like Him so that we could be in relationship with Him. Because we are made in the image of God, we have intellect. We have a moral compass. We were built to be in fellowship with each other, in relationships with each other. Because we're made in God's image, we're able to have compassion and mercy and friendship and fellowship and all the good things that life has to offer. But another part about having been created in the image of God, being in God's image, is that we have the capacity and the ability to make free choices. And although man was given a righteous nature right from the beginning, man makes the evil choice to rebel against his Creator. He makes the decision to rebel against that one Creator who put inside him some of His essence. It wages war against the image of God. That imperfection within us, that human part of us, wages war against the image of God that tries to speak to us. And as we wage war, and as our imperfection triumphs over God's image, we sin. We sin against the Creator. And with each sin that we commit, we break down the creation of God. With each sin that we commit, we break down that image of the Creator that He put in us. But even though we choose to rebel, even though we sin, even though we turn against our Creator, all the while there still exists within each one of us the likeness of God, the image of God. The good news here is that when we do sin, when we do trample over the image of God, there's still hope. When God buys someone back from their sin, from their imperfection, when He redeems them, He begins to restore that original image of God that we were all created with, that original righteousness that we were first created with. Look what Paul writes in the book of Ephesians. Look what Paul writes in the book of Ephesians. In the Lord's name I tell you this, do not continue living like those who do not believe. Now listen, their thoughts are worth nothing. They do not understand. They know nothing because they refuse to listen. So they cannot have the life that God gives. It's interesting what Paul says about these people. What's he say? He said their thoughts are worth nothing. They have no understanding. They know nothing. Some translations say that their intellect has been darkened. They're in the dark. And why? Why does Paul say that they don't know nothing and that they're worth nothing? Because they do what? They refuse to what? They refuse to listen. Now, if you were just to read this verse in this translation, you may think that Paul's saying, these people are worth nothing, know nothing, and they're morons because they're not listening to me. That's not what this is saying here. This is I use this translation on purpose because I don't like this translation of this verse. A lot of the translations will say something to the effect of, it doesn't say they don't listen. They say their hearts are blind. Okay, now wait a minute. We went from not being able to hear to their hearts being blind. This phrase, this Greek words that are used here, I know you love it when I go Greek on you. The Greek word that's used here in this sentence is really talking about a skin condition. It's the skin condition where the skin doesn't feel anything. The skin hardens. It's like a callus on your hand. Or when, if you ever get a really bad burn, you can touch, after it heals a little bit, you touch it, you can't feel anything. This hardening of the heart, that's where we get the term, the hardening of the heart. The heart doesn't feel anything. The heart can't see anything. It's in darkness. It can't hear anything. It can't feel anything. What do you suppose the heart's not listening to? What do you think the heart is ignoring? The heart is ignoring the image of God that is within each one of us. We ignore it. Our heart becomes callous to it. We don't let the image of God penetrate it. Where there is feeling, there is spiritual life. Where there is no feeling, where there is hardness, there is no life. Paul says they cannot have the life that God gives. It is ignoring the likeness of God. It exists within us. He goes on to say, look what he says, they have lost all feeling. They have lost all feeling of shame. And they use their lives for doing evil, and continually they want to do all kinds of evil. But what you learned in Christ was not like this. I know you heard about him. You are in him. So you were taught the truth that is in Jesus. Look at that first phrase. They lost all feeling. Their heart has lost, it's not penetrable anymore. They lost the feeling of shame. We just talked about that. The likeness of God, that moral compass, that last vestige of our righteousness that's within us, has been lost. Just like when Adam and Eve sinned, they had that feeling of shame. They hid. They knew enough to hide from God. They were ashamed of what they did, so they hid. Some people have trampled over the image of God so badly that's been placed within them that they feel no shame anymore. They know nothing. They understand nothing. They are in darkness. And that's what Paul exactly says when he goes on here. He goes on to say this. You were taught to leave off your old self, to stop living the evil way you lived before. That old self becomes worse because people are fooled by the evil things they want to do. What's it say here? The old self becomes worse. It continues to harden. It continues to spiral downward. It continues to trample over that thing that God put inside of us because it follows its imperfect human desires. But then, Paul gives us some good news. Paul says, but you were taught to be made new in your hearts, to become a new person. Listen, that new person is made to be like God, made to be truly good and holy. There's another interpretation that I read last night that I really like, the New American Standard Version. It says, put on the new self, which is in the likeness of God, has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. The likeness of God. The writers always go back. You'd be surprised if you read through Scripture how many times you're going to see things that say the likeness of God, like God, the image of God. We have that spiritual DNA within us, the likeness of God. But when we reject our imperfections and we accept the redemption that is found in Jesus, God rebuilds that image within us. He begins to restore that image within us. That morality, that intellect, that social, all those aspects of Him that's inside us, He rebuilds it. Now, I told you at the beginning of this lesson, I told you that I was going to tell you how to thrive in an imperfect world and how to thrive with imperfect people. And I told you the one thing that we have in our favor is that we have the image of God within us. And that having this image of God, this likeness of God, is the key to thriving in this world. The only thing left to do is tell you how to unlock the door with that key. And I'm going to tell you how to do that next week. So you got to come back next week. You got to get out of bed again next week. You got to come back here and listen to me again next week. But leave here today knowing this. Leave knowing this. You were created in the image and likeness of God. And because of that, you are valuable. And because of that, you are useful. And if you allow that image and likeness of God to penetrate your heart, if you allow it to guide your mind, you will be capable of great things. And you will have a more richer, more fuller, more joyful, more peaceful life here and now. You were made in the image of God. Let's all stand together.